Good evening, everyone. We are continuing with this absolutely wonderful book, In Divine Friendship, collection of Swami Kriyananda's letters. We are still in the section on writing, which I thought would be a little esoteric for everyone, but it's actually turned out to be quite the opposite, because guess what? Everybody uses words. So even though he's talking about writing with words, he's really talking about communication. And I think we'll probably, I don't even think we'll finish tonight, but there's a couple of really good letters in here now. So, and then other great sections, I peeked ahead, so I think we're going to enjoy this for quite a few more months. So let us begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us that we may feel your wisdom, Swamiji, and your transforming vibration of clarity and devotion to God and Guru. We seek to live a life that resembles your life in its most essential qualities: devotion to God, attunement to the Guru, integrity and honor in all one's interactions. Guide us and bless us that our aspirations may be fulfilled. Om. Peace. Amen. Let's have just a couple of moments of silence and then we'll start. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, so here we are, and let's just start right in. This letter was written in September of 2002, And it's in response to a long list of corrections that someone sent for a manuscript that Swami sent out. So let me just give you the context, which I think I've explained, but just so you know where this letter's coming from. Whenever Swamiji was working on a book, he had a mailing list, and I don't know how many people were on it. I never actually counted. It probably was around 20, maybe 25. Maybe less. It's sort of, actually, I'm a little bit blank on it. I have to go back and check. But what it was when he would finish a chapter, and Swami would write a chapter and get the inspiration out, get the main ideas out, and then he would go back and edit it quite a lot. But at the stage where he felt like he'd really expressed it, and Swamiji's way of writing, usually when he was writing a book, was to write the whole book and then go back to the beginning. He didn't make each chapter perfect as he went along. But he worked on it until he really felt that he had expressed the inspiration that he felt, and that he'd expressed it clearly. Then when he went back to edit, he wouldn't be trying to, as a rule, really think out the ideas or receive the revelation. It would be clear to him that the revelation was there, and he would just have to say it more appropriately. I think in other letters in here, he's talked about his process, how he works like that. So at the stage where he really had the essence of what he wanted to say, he would just send an email to all of us, and he would attach the latest chapter. Because I had such an interest in writing, and because learning to write from him was so important for me, and because I just had the freedom to do it, I almost always would drop everything and read it right on the spot and give him some response. And sometimes he would ask, "What do you think about this section?" But not often. Mostly he'd just send it to you with a little comment: "This was hard to write, this was very inspiring, I'm particularly pleased with this," whatever he might want to say. I would usually read it right away and give him some kind of a comment. And if something really struck me as being particularly good, or for some reason confusing, or on rare occasion some kind of a question mark about what he'd said, I would write back to him. In other words, I tried to give him an active, sincere response. I just didn't say, "Oh, thank you, I loved it," unless I did love it, and then I would say that. So now he's writing to someone who sent him a long list of suggested changes for the manuscript they'd received. Swami writes, "Dear friend, I'm afraid you've misunderstood my intentions in sending you manuscripts." Oh, I forgot one more thing. The other reason why I would always read them right away is that whatever Swamiji was creating in the moment was the most dynamic flow of his consciousness, because he always concentrated completely on what he was working on. So I would also read them right away, because if he'd just finished it and sent it, it was like falling in right with the energy that he was putting out in the moment. So I considered it to be a major way of staying in tune with him, by staying in tune with what was flowing through him. I knew he wanted our feedback, but I never took our feedback seriously. I knew he didn't need our feedback, in the sense he wasn't waiting to know what to do next for us to comment. Unless on the rare occasions when there was something that really struck me, that I just thought, this isn't going to be understood, or this is really ambiguous what you've written here, or did you mean to imply? So anyway, he says, "I'm afraid you've misunderstood my intentions in sending you manuscripts. I wondered in the past why you'd made all those suggestions. Your letter made it clear. I haven't thought of a team of people helping me with my writing. And that obviously is what was in the letter. I don't know anything about to whom this letter was addressed. I hadn't thought of a team of people helping me with my writing. The person must have expressed themselves as being part of Swami's writing team. And Swami writes back and says, "Really? I'd never considered that. All I've done is share what I've done with a few friends out of my own exuberance. A long list of corrections gives me the impression, after I've driven myself to exhaustion finishing something, that you're about to say, thanks, and here's what's wrong with it. Swami, he says that phrase, driven himself to exhaustion, which he actually often did. But he really did. The intensity with which he would write, and when the creative flow of energy had a hold of him, it was his master. He had to follow it through until he'd really felt that he had answered the call. I mean, he often has talked about this. When inspiration when inspiration strikes, you can't say, oh, I have other things to do this afternoon, I'll think about it later. So when inspiration is there, you have to follow through on it. And he and we, I certainly have learned it. When you think, oh, I'll just deal with it tomorrow, when you go there tomorrow, it's often not there. So often when he'd drive himself into exhaustion, it was because the flow of inspiration was there, and it's one of the laws of prosperity. If you don't receive what's given to you, it's not by any means a certainty that it'll just be waiting when you happen to get around to care about it. So because Swamiji didn't complain about the work that he had to do, although sometimes he would mention it, and because he put forth such an enormous amount of energy on such a regular basis, sometimes people just didn't appreciate sort of what had gone into what he was doing, because he would humbly call it a draft that's going to need editing. So apparently whoever received this letter just had that feeling like, well, this is still a work in progress, and I'll just chime in now with how I think it could be made better. It could be well-intentioned, but it wasn't a very sensitive response to the way Swami created. Those of us who worked with him over years and made the common mistakes actually had to learn the art of giving Swami feedback. He definitely wanted feedback, but when you're in a very open, creative mode and you're trying very hard to feel that inspiration, the feedback has to come in the flow of that inspiration. It can't come, well, that was a nice try, but here's how it really should have been done. It's very unusual that was an appropriate response for Swamiji. I dare say never, because he simply had too much intuitive integrity in what he did. So whoever this person is, apparently they weren't quite in touch with what Swami was asking, which is what he said himself. I've always been confused by all those suggestions. Oh, now I see that you think we're writing this together. And then Swami goes on to explain that we're not. He says, in fact, my writing is very much from within myself. One might say it's an act between me and Master. I don't write by committee. If someone makes a suggestion, I consider it. But to send a manuscript to so many people with the main purpose of inviting their corrections would not only result in further exhaustion for me, but would force me to adopt an attitude toward writing as though it were a matter of putting the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together. I couldn't imagine writing like that. Now, for some people, that is exactly what they do. It's intellectual. And so they're reasoning it out, and people give them pieces, and they put it together. In fact, one of the criticisms Swamiji made of, actually it was a story that I wrote, it was actually a children's story. At his suggestion, I was writing children's story for a while. I never succeeded, but I worked on one that I thought wasn't bad. And when I showed it to Swami, his answer was very interesting. He said, it's mental. He said, you can publish it if you want, which was more than he gave me credit for a lot of things I wrote. You can publish it if you want, but it's mental, is what he said. Meaning it was mind-born. It wasn't inspired. It wasn't an act of inspiration between me and Master. I hadn't gotten any feedback. It wasn't that I put it together like a jigsaw puzzle, but I did sort of put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. I mean, I just sort of had certain ideas, and I know just what he meant. But Swami didn't write that way. Swami didn't write from his mind. He wrote from his spirit. It was an act between him and Master. And you have to meditate on that if it's not obvious what that means. I've given a lot of thought to these issues, but I didn't understand them for a very long time. So I know it's something you just have to feel from inside yourself. After more than 60 years of writing, this was in 2001, I'm pretty comfortable with what I do generally. I love the way Swami understates it. After 60 years, I'm pretty comfortable with what I do. He leaves it to you to say, oh dear, yeah, I haven't been writing for 60 years. I'm pretty comfortable with what I do generally. In such a field, perfection isn't possible because the standards vary so much. Interesting comment. You know, what people consider good writing is really a matter of taste to a large extent, at least to a certain extent, let me put it that way. My main purpose is to get my thoughts and vibrations, and he emphasizes the word vibrations. My main purpose is to get my thoughts and my vibrations across. Some of your suggestions are good, others are okay, but change the vibrations. I think I told in the context of this book, when Swamiji was doing the final editing on part one of what was the path at that point. Then later he rewrote it a lot into the new path, but it was the path then. That I and this other woman, Kalyani, were working with Swamiji, reading the book out loud to him, typing, and so on. She was an English teacher, or Kalyani, and a very good writer. And she just had a feeling about one of the chapters he's written, and she actually put a lot of energy into rewriting it, suggesting it sort of from another angle. And when he read what she'd done, he commented. He said, first of all, he said, there's probably 1,000 ways to say anything. You can put words together in endless combinations and still convey the same thoughts. So when she had put words together in a different combination, he said, but what you have written has your vibration. He said, and this is my book, so I think it's more important to have my vibration. Now exactly, I've never sat and analyzed. I wish now that I had. I don't recall if I did actually look at what she wrote or not. When Swami didn't accept it, I'm not sure it stayed out on the table to be read. But I would have been curious to see what she wrote and how it changed the vibration from what Swami wrote. I've pointed out in these pages, just in his letters, the way he expresses himself, the way he was considerate to people, just even what I just said, the understated way he says something. I've been writing for 60 years and I'm pretty comfortable with what I do mostly. I mean, he could have said that in a lot of different ways, which is, I've been writing for 6 decades. How long have you been writing? You know, I'm an old man and I don't want to change my ways. I mean, how dare you suggest these things? I mean, he could have said lots of different ways, but he just chose kind of a toss-off in a humble way, and that gives you a vibration of sort of how he expresses himself. You know, actually, while I'm thinking of this, a great deal, not a great deal, but well, some of the writing that is published by Self-Realization Fellowship, some of the essays, the books of essays that are taken from his talks, for example, or even some of the books, the way they're edited. And this is the impression I have. Especially the books that were taken from notes that people took. If you take notes of somebody writing, and in those days they didn't record so they couldn't transcribe in the same way, you often just take down the essential ideas because you're trying to keep up with somebody talking. And it's a lot of what's around the central ideas that gives the feeling of how it's expressed. And it's not true in every paragraph, but it's true to a large extent. The way Master is presented by those editors, there's a lot of declarative sentences. And there's a lot of peremptory. You know, this is what you should do, this is what you should do, this is how you should do it, this is what a sincere devotee would do. So you end up just feeling that you've received a lot of absolutes. Whereas when I read the way Swami expresses Master, and Swamiji himself has taken issue with some of the way others have edited Master's words, because as he put it, he said it doesn't feel like the way Master spoke. And so sometimes it needs to be, you might even actually not be able to do it quite verbatim, because when a person is speaking, even if sometimes if it's a declarative sentence, when they say it, there can be a lot of energy around it that makes it not seem peremptory. But when it's written, it just sounds entirely different. Just there's so many nuances. And for that reason, I just prefer the way Swami edits Master's words, and I feel his consciousness more. So that's the vibration. You get the same thoughts across, but what kind of language do you use? What's the rhythm of the language? And is it just laid out, or does it flow? Does it sing? Does it have a poetic feeling to it? All of that can make so much difference in how you receive it in your own consciousness. That's what Swami's trying to explain. So, he says, some of your suggestions are good, others are okay, but they change the vibrations. I'll go over them carefully and use what pleases me. But but this month with the trial, my mind won't be much on these things. That was the last year of 12 years of litigation. And there was a trial in the year 2002, and it was a big deal. September 29th, this is written 2002. So that was at the time when we were really just finishing up 12 years of litigation. So he also wanted to warn whoever it was that I'm not going to give this my all. It's just not going to happen. You know, the difference between written and spoken words was very humorously illustrated in the movie My Cousin Vinny. My Cousin Vinny's a very, very funny movie. There's a little bit of foul language, but the movie is so funny that you can kind of put up with it. Even Swami, who usually doesn't like that sort of thing, didn't mind at all. It was just the characters. They were kind of rough and tumble, and that's the way they talked. But there wasn't anything low consciousness about the movie. It's just there was a little bit of language. But part of the movie, it's a comedy, and it's these two guys are driving across the country to go to college on the West Coast from the East Coast, and they stop in a little grocery store and buy some things, and accidentally the guy walks out with a can of tuna in his pocket. After they've driven away, these two young men, then another man comes into that store, and he's a criminal, and he steals some things and he shoots the clerk, and the clerk dies. So he shoots him dead. And then, for various reasons, these two young men are accosted, and because they're driving a similar car, the police in this small town arrest them. He thinks he's being arrested for accidentally shoplifting the can of tuna, but he's actually being arrested for killing the clerk. But it's just a comedy of errors, and eventually he gets his cousin from New York to come and try the case. And it's My Cousin Vinny. It's very funny. But at one point, the young man is being interviewed by this small town policeman who sort of thinks he's caught the criminal here. And he says something about, so then you went into the store and you shot the clerk. And the young man says, "Shot the clerk? I shot the clerk?" Like that. And then it's like about 3 questions, and each one is he says, "I shot the clerk," like that. But then when it's read later, it's talked about how he confessed. And he said, so I said, "So then you went in the store and you shot the clerk." "I shot the clerk." And then this happened, and so yes, and I shot the clerk. But each time it was an exclamation of complete disbelief, but it was written, and that's how the whole comedy unfolds. But it's a very interesting point, because it had the words were there, it was the same meaning, it was the same thought, but it had nothing of what was actually intended. And this is where, style, vibration, and all of that really comes into play. So let's go on here to The Essence of Things, this is called. This was written in March of 1998. I think this was written to a man who was devoted to Ananda, but came onto the path, I'm pretty sure that's who we're reading here, but came onto the path later in life and was never quite able to relinquish the values and the way of being that he'd always lived. He couldn't quite capture what Swamiji was trying to move him into. He was very intellectual. I'm trying to think what the exact word is. He lived more in the mainstream of culture. He accepted the mainstream of culture much more than Swami did. He had much more respect for the way things usually were done, where Swami never paid any attention. And he was a man who's probably a contemporary of Swami's, a little older than I. Was he older than I? Yeah, he was older than I. And I'm not even certain, but I think that's who this is from. So Swami writes, I must accept that our temperaments are different. I love also, Swami just starts right in. He doesn't waste a paragraph saying, oh, it's spring now and the new life is coming forward, and when spring comes, we all think in new ways. He doesn't bother. He wrote me a letter and I'll answer your letter. I must accept that our temperaments are different. It's also a way of writing, because you don't wear someone out with sort of fluffing everything up around the edges. So by the time you get to the point, the person has already had to work their way through so many words, they can't really tell what the point is, because you've spent so much time saying things that you could have said to anyone. And that's what I mean by that is, like, Swami always knew who he was really talking to. And he trained me to answer letters in the same way. He never said, warm up with platitudes. It's like somebody's written to you, they want an answer to their letter. They don't want a sort of general weather report. I mean, unless that is the question, but they don't want a weather report. They've written to you with important issues and they want you to answer them. So he often starts right in. I must accept that our temperaments are different. So right away, you know what the letter's going to be about. And you know what Swami's thinking. And you know that he's read your letter, because he's really coming right to you. And then that's also vibration, because that was Swami's way. He was just direct. I remember, if he had something to say to you, he just said it. He trusted the friendship sufficiently also that he didn't feel he had to do a lot of introductions. He could just say it really directly. I found it very relaxing, because we didn't waste time on small talk. Not that Swami couldn't be utterly cordial when the event required it, but I must accept that our temperaments are different. My own outlook on life itself has always irritated some people who believe that I toss off generalities liberally and without serious thought. It's so funny, because I would definitely put myself in that category. The first decade or so that I was with Swami, and even later, but I got used to it, he would make such categorical statements about things, and they weren't always complimentary, just how people are, how people were, what you can expect from people. And I couldn't. It's interesting, because I was quite judgmental. It wasn't at all that I hesitated to evaluate and condemn. Actually, I'm thinking about it just now. I'm really understanding it. It was always a confusion to me, because I didn't mind drawing judgment. It wasn't like I thought you should always be nice at all. In fact, I had to learn to be a lot nicer than I was by nature. But at the time when I was still quite critical and quite judgmental, I still found his statements just overwhelming, because they were just what appeared to me to be sweeping generalizations about the nature of humanity. And he says people believe that I mean, people find me irritating because they believe I toss off generalities liberally and without serious thought. Now, see, my dilemma was I knew that he had serious thought behind it, and I never dared dismiss what he said, but often it just, the actual word I want to use is it was too much energy to just commit yourself in such a strong way to such a strong point of view. Just the sheer energy of it made me nervous. Not the criticalness, but just to be able to stand like that. But he said, you think I do it without serious thought? And I knew he didn't, but I just couldn't handle it. In fact, I myself am impatient of generalities and will often challenge them. So he sets it up to be confusing. What I strive to catch is the essence of things. Now, this is when I read this letter, which was later, but that's exactly right. He sees the essential nature of things. You can say most people resist change, and that is the essential nature of human life. It's not that everybody resists change, or even, how are we going to quantify it? Well, some people don't, some people do, some people hesitate. You have all these conditions, and this is what Swami writes about in this letter. But as the essence of human nature is that we become attached to the status quo and that we resist change. And some people won't want to hear that. Or you might want to say, the essence of Christianity is that they believe too much in the institution, that maybe there's too much dogma, that they don't have inner communion. And then you can say, well, some people have inner communion, many people do, others, yes, but the essence of what the Christian church is lacking is an understanding of inner communion. And Swamiji would just make that statement. And it was the essence of it. It wasn't the majority even necessarily, but it's the essential issue. I mean, I'm not saying he said that one specifically, but he probably did. Christians need to understand inner as well as external communion. And then all these Christians and you want to defend them, but that doesn't mean that the essence of what he said isn't true. So that's the difference. What I strive to catch is the essence of things. When I wrote Your Sun Sign as a Spiritual Guide, which he wrote in the early 70s, for instance, I meditated on people in each sign and tried to capture the essence that bound them together. What are the unifying qualities? It would be easy to point out exceptions to my presentation. There are countless numbers of them. Nevertheless, what I've written is in fact something essential, and many people, including astrologers, have said that it's the clearest description of the characteristics of each sign they have ever read. Swami mentions that book also because he wasn't a professional astrologer, and he did it from study, and he did it from discussion with those who knew more than he, but he primarily did it from intuition and inspiration. And that's why he said he meditated on all the Leos that he knew, or all the Geminis. And just as he said, he tried to feel of all the possible characteristics, what is it that binds them together? That's the essence of what it is to be that particular sign. And that book it's a classic. Even a friend of mine who's a serious astrologer just recently commented just how exceedingly good it is. Those who are even very deep into it feel, because he caught the essentials, you see. Sometimes we get caught up in the details and we miss the main point. The same with the Hindu way of awakening. I am perfectly aware that there are many exceptions to anything I say. I myself could point out quite a few. Nevertheless, in essence, I know I am right, and it is of that essence that I'm writing. If I'm wrong in this, then my whole life has been a mistake. For that is how I see things, how I work, and how I try always to explain truth. I think this person had some opinions about the Hindu way of awakening, if I'm not mistaken, or is this the book we're talking about? 1998. I don't know if the Hindu way. Might have been the Hindu way. You know, the Hindu way of awakening is really interesting. That book, let me think how to say it. What he did in the Hindu way of awakening, the Hindu way of awakening is what got me started on book study of Swami Kriyananda. Because when that book was published, whenever it was, I don't have it on my shelf, so I can't pull it out. I struggled to read it, bearing in mind, as Swami himself says to me, it's not that I couldn't understand it, but I have to understand something well enough to be able to explain it to someone else before I consider that I've understood it. I have to really be able to creatively express it, or else I don't feel like I myself know the book. And I was working so hard to understand that book that it occurred to me that everyone must be struggling because I had so much context and still I was working so hard. Because the point he was making is so subtle. I know that was earlier in here, and it was under the I don't know what section it was, Meaning in the Arts or the Oneness of Religion. There was a letter from someone who wanted to have a theater festival where everybody from different religions came and presented plays about their religion. And Swami was really emphatic in saying to that person that you entirely missed the point of the book. And the reason he called it the way of awakening was he talked about that every religion has two aspects to it. It has the way of belief, and in the way of belief there is no reconciliation. Jesus is the only Savior, and that's kind of the beginning, the middle, and the end. The Jews never want to have any images on their altar, and the Hindus have the pictures of all the gods and goddesses. I mean, you can get all these people together and everybody will be gracious to one another, but inside they really won't have a lot of regard. They'll just be presenting their own story, respecting you for having yours, but where is the point of reconciliation? It's impossible to reconcile. The ways of belief are different. So what he called it the Hindu way of awakening, what he was trying to say is you start with the way of belief that looks a certain way, but what happens when you get inside of that way of belief, if, and this is the giant if it's properly understood, then the way of awakening is the same for every spiritual path. It opens the heart, there is compassion, energy rises at the spine, even if you don't know any of this is happening, humility, compassion, and ultimately experience. It's the way of awakening where the unity of religions is experienced, not in the way of belief. And that's why Master said, how did he put it? Self-realization has come to unite all religions. And when Master was, and what he meant by that is not self-realization fellowship is going to be the Catholic Church of the future. This actually was a serious conversation Swami had to have on this point. He meant the experience of self-realization, and the self-realization is the unifying principle, which is that the way of awakening becomes the same. And back when he was talking about the theater festival, Swami was trying to explain that if you just invite all these religions to come, they don't have any idea what the unifying principle is. They'll just come and present their way of belief. And we can all like each other and enjoy what we're seeing, but it won't really accomplish what Master was trying to accomplish, which is to have us really understand behind all the externals how we really are one reality. And that's where true unity will come from. Otherwise, we're just being polite to each other, and in often cases just waiting for our path to win in the final analysis. And so, let me come back to this for just a minute. Swami saying to the man about the theater festival, he said, just basically absolutely not. I couldn't possibly support it. It would reinforce everything that I'm trying to speak against. And then Swami essentially said, it's just not time. People need more time before they're really going to be able to understand this. Consciousness needs to get a little higher, which is what we're doing. Swami's just laying out the groundwork for this to happen. Master gave respect to all religious paths. He writes in whispers. He honors them all. But if you see what he's really honoring is that we all actually come to the same inward reality wherever we start on the outside. So it's an interesting point. And so in the Hindu way of awakening, Swami was talking a lot about the essential qualities of various religions. And if it wasn't the same man, it was somebody else who wrote him at great length. And he also wrote strongly about the revelations of Christ, because they just couldn't take the energy that Swami was putting out, where he would just say so strongly, this is what the essential reality is, and this is how it's misguided. And he said it about all religions. I was amused, maybe I've shared this before, but in the Festival of Light, which we recite every week, Swamiji has tried to make a unified, a new concept. That's why it's called a Festival of Light, just light uniting us all. And he has in there, your chosen people have always been those of every race or nation who with deep love choose thee. And then we together as a congregation affirm that we will always choose divine love above all other comments. Now that's a very direct comment to a very precious Jewish principle that the Jews are the chosen people. And so it contradicts it quite strongly. But okay, so let me finish my thought. So I was doing the Sunday service and I was doing the festival one Sunday, and afterwards this man came up to me, and he was an Israeli, so he wasn't only committed to Judaism, but he was very strong in the necessity of the Jewish people to affirm their reality in order to make Israel a success. And I respect that. But he came up to me, he was very upset about the chosen people line in the Festival of Light. And what occurred to me in the moment, forgive me if I've told this story recently, what occurred to me in the moment, as I said, oh, Swami dismantles precious beliefs of the Hindus, and I think the Buddhists, and definitely the Christians. I said, the one against the Jews was the only one that you recognized. But he just sweepingly and in the same sort of manner just corrects. The only begotten is the Christ consciousness descending. It's not Jesus Christ. Just like that. And there's something about the others also. I mean, he's going to the essentials and he's lifting it up. They were sort of didn't quite know what to respond. I sympathized, but I spoke to him a little bit about the essence of this, the essential nature. When Master called his work the Church of All Religions, he even had a second pulpit in his church where he would have visiting ministers come and also preach, but he never invited anyone to actually preach, which was interesting. Swami said it was because there was no one he could invite, because they would graciously teach the way of belief. These were Swami's words later, but they didn't know how to talk about self-realization as the unifying principle. But Master did it there for who knows what reasons, but he had his reasons. Let me just finish what the last thought was. Now, let's see. Oh, yes. But in his own teaching, Master only taught from the Gita and the New Testament, a little bit from the Old Testament, but primarily from the New Testament. He primarily taught the teachings of Christianity, of Jesus and of Krishna, the original teachings. And when he was asked, why are you doing that? You say it's the Church of All Religions, but you're really only talking about two. At least you only have the scriptures from two. And he said it was the will of Babaji that I do it this way. Now that was a different kind of answer. But Swamiji's comment was that within the Gita and the Bible, you have the essence of all religions. And in fact, Jesus' teachings were a continuation of Judaism. It was Judaism for a long time. And only later did it actually separate from Judaism. So when Jesus was teaching, he was really teaching Judaism. So that's just an interesting side effect. But what Swamiji said is, if you can grasp the essence of why the teachings of Jesus and Krishna are the same, he said from that you can understand any other path that you explore. Self-realization is the unifying principle. I can't go more than that because I haven't made a study of it. But it's all very interesting to contemplate, because sometimes what Swami was saying was much more subtle than it first appeared, and often what Master was saying was much more subtle than it first appeared. So we have put in our temple the symbols of all the world religions, and when we were thinking of doing that, our temple here in Palo Alto, and they've actually done it in many of the temples, Ananda temples. And when we were doing it, I said to Swamiji, well, Master did it at Lake Shrine. And Swami's answer said, actually, that was done by the minister who was there. It wasn't actually Master who did that. But I talked to Swamiji on the question of the way of belief and the way of awakening, as to whether or not it was a good idea to do it, because we were refurbishing our temple, and we made the decision to do that. It wasn't self-evident. And Swami did not do it in the temple that he built at the village. I told him that the reason we were doing it was this. I'm saying this because it's very important to try to understand why things were done, not merely what was done. And Swamiji was extraordinary in not giving us conclusions, but not only giving us conclusions, but giving the process by which he arrived at those conclusions. Because then what he trained us, he taught us how to think. Because if you know how to think, and if you know the principles that Swami used as he came to decisions, plus intuition, then it equips you to be able to work with those, or you know the principles behind the decision, and then another decision that's not identical, but maybe related to those principles, you'll also know how to make a decision. When I wrote Light Bearer, among many things, but above all, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to describe, of the 45 years I had with Swamiji, what he did, but I also wanted you to understand why he did it. Because we have to carry on this work, and many generations after us will carry on this work, and we don't want them just to say, well, Master had a pulpit there for the Church of All Religions to invite guest ministers, so we'll have a pulpit and we'll invite guest ministers. I mean, we want to know what he was trying to accomplish. When I used to have trouble with things Swamiji said, what sort of finally got me into a better position was, instead of thinking about what he said, I tried to think about what he was trying to accomplish. And when I thought about what he was trying to accomplish, I understood what he said better. And if I was in the flow of trying to accomplish what he had to accomplish, whatever I suggested was often more helpful. Because it wasn't just contradicting, it was actually attuning and trying to move with it. And that's what I wanted through Light Bearer, was to give us the capacity to be attuned. And because he had so many obstacles in his life, we really began to see that. Now, I had a thought here, and let me see if I can find it, because I was going to say something else that was important there, and that was the end of it. Maybe I've already finished it. Okay. So, going right along, then he says, if I am wrong in, looking at the essence, my whole life has been a mistake, for that is how I see things, how I work, and how I try always to explain the truth. He doesn't, in other words, Swami doesn't spend a lot of time with argument, counter-argument. Then you could say this might be a problem, but I'm not really going to, but this is the answer to that, and then this is the other way you could answer that, and this is the way you could answer that. He just has, after careful thought, has come to an essential idea. He declares it, he supports it, but he's not an academician with all these footnotes about everybody's point of view. I don't want to offend anyone. I just want to express the essential truth as I see it. And above all, to help people to see something that your letter suggests you don't want to join me in. To me, the crystal clear fact that truth is one and universal, and that the fundamental life view of all scriptures cannot be in conflict, else there is no real truth. My belief is, if I do know the author of this letter properly, is that he had a Christian background. And so he was always in some way defending the Christian, as he called it, point of view, and always trying to sort of hold on to the Christian point of view and not let it get lost in Swamiji's different attitude, which is why Swami says right here, I don't think you really want me to join me in saying that truth is one, because part of the argument that this man was always making to Swami is, well, yes, but this is also true. And then therefore Swamiji could never make a strong declaration about the way things are. And Swami was very much inclined to make strong declarations about the way things are. So, this is the fundamental theme of the book, by which I hope to help give religion itself the respect of people once again, which it has lost. So I think we're talking about Hindu way of awakening, where Swami's going to contrast whatever he's talking about with other religious ways of doing things, and he's going to make a statement about which one is better. And this, the author of the letter to Swamiji, he doesn't want to do that. And Swami does want to do that. He wants to say, this is the path. This is the path of self-realization. And this is why other ways of approaching spirituality have a certain validity, but not as much as this does. This is their essential weakness. And you could see how difficult that would be. It was difficult for me because there was so much energy behind it, so much commitment behind it. It took me a while, as I said, to catch up. So then Swami says, thanks for writing, God bless you. Now, immediately, let's see, March 1998. I think Swami must have just written this practically the next day because it's a continuation. It's another letter, but it's just the same letter. Reflecting further on our exchange of letters, I realize that your resistance to my book is inevitable. So we are talking about Hindu way. We simply think differently. So the whole premise of Hindu way, that the ways of belief are always going to be different and the ways of awakening are always going to be the same. And this person I know just really wanted there to be a Christian way of God realization that was different than other ways of God realization. It is your nature to ponder the pros and cons of every subject. It is mine to condense the issues in an essential understanding. So Swami, he didn't really like to say, but on the other hand. You have, I think, an aversion to generalities. To me, no truth can be stated except in generalities. To you, it looks as if I merely, in almost cavalier fashion, jump to my conclusions. I know I arrive at them only after deep thought and meditation, usually for years, taking countless pros and cons into consideration, but finally offering them up to intuitive insight. And that's the difference between the way Swami does things and the way many theologians and scholars do things. Theologians and scholars will forever leave the question open. Swami will feel he's gathered enough evidence and now he can say definitively. I remember when my 2-week stint in college, although I did actually stay in college for a year, school year, I took a class called Consciousness because I had had my first experience of changing consciousness because it was the psychedelic era. I'd never even had a glass of wine or a beer before I took a psychedelic and discovered that if you change your essential consciousness, everything is different. And it completely answered the question didn't really know how to ask, which is, how do you really make changes in your life? And it wasn't drugs, because I very quickly lost interest in drugs. I like having a clear mind. I don't like it muddled by anything. But it told me that the issue was consciousness. Swamiji himself, although he never favored drugs, had to admit that it was a catalyzing event for a lot of people who afterwards became very serious devotees. Quite possibly I would have anyway. My karma was so strong. But that is what happened to me. Oh my gosh, change consciousness, change everything. So I took a class in consciousness, because at the school, there it was, they offered one. And I thought we were going to try to find out the truth. We were going to wrestle together and find out what was really true in life. But what we were really going to do is we were going to just talk about how many different ways you can talk about consciousness, and how many different people had how many different opinions. And I just lost interest so fast. I was looking for wisdom, and every class that I was involved in there was trying to give me knowledge. And knowledge is worth having, especially if you have a particular goal in life in which you have to have knowledge. Trying to be a doctor or a lawyer, as good examples, you have to have a lot of knowledge. I had no such goals. I wanted truth. And so I was so disappointed. I mean, the professor steadfastly resisted my deep desire to find out what was true. He only wanted us to become knowledgeable about what everybody thought. And then, weigh in the balance one against the other and see the good points here and the good points there and the weak points of that argument balanced by this one. Swami said, I just can't do that. I see the essence of what's going on, and then I take a stand and I move toward it. Part of it is, you see, if you have master's teachings, if you have the teachings of a master, and of course, master's teachings are an ideal, where, let me see how to say it exactly, where the path is laid out so clearly. So that's what happened when I found Master's teachings and Swamiji's teachings. It was just so clear. There was no and I could really understand where I was going and how I was going to get there. It became a pole star, a beam of light by which everything else could be measured. And it had such a gravitas to it and such a clarity. So that's how Swamiji's life became oriented around Master's teachings, as mine has around the way Swami expresses Master's teachings. And so you can really say, this is the pole star, this is the thread, self-realization, and this is how everything fits in relation to it. And in that point, you can speak, you can explain the essence, you can say what other people think are generalities, but it's not. It's the essential thread. But if you don't have real clarity about that essential thread, or if you resist that essential thread, which is what Swami also said to this person, I am trying to show this universal truth, and I don't really think you're that interested in it. He was much more interested in being open-minded, but in showing the principles of Christianity, which was quite different. Not an invalid thing to do, but just different. So then Swami says, I can't think in any other way. You too can't think in any other way except the one you've chosen, is what Swami means. It is for reasons like this that writers often feud. And I have no desire to feud with you. So let us just leave things as they stand, agreeing to disagree on fundamental points of writing and thinking, but remaining friends. I hope as human beings. Remaining friends, I hope, as human beings, meaning that intellectually we're not going to come to a resolution here. We're just too different. I am doing the best job of which I am capable on this book, and I recognize that some people won't like it. The statements I make in it are not meant to offend, but they express clearly what I do quite sincerely believe to be true. So, the Hindu way of awakening is the subject. And this gentleman found it offensive to the Christian point of view, and they just were never going to come to terms. I've made one of the changes you suggested, but when you wrote of many, many points on which evidently you feel I've been too cavalier, I have to say that no, I am being incisive and true to my own understanding. And if in this clarity I offend, I simply must accept it. We go back to the beginning, where in the other letter where Swami was saying, I'm not writing as a committee. I'm not writing to please everybody. I'm not writing to say, oh, you mustn't say that because it will offend the Sufis. You mustn't say that because it will offend the Baptists. He said, I'm going to say it because I think it is the truth. And if I offend, I'll just have to accept it. He's not looking to offend, but he doesn't mind offending. That was Swami. That was just what he was. And you had to tune in to realize that he had no interest in offending people, meaning he wasn't trying to have it over anyone. And he didn't feel it was necessary to tear anything down, but it was necessary to unequivocally declare what he saw to be true. He wasn't afraid to do it. Nevertheless, I don't want you to think I oppose your way of reasoning, even though it isn't mine. Your way is your way, and this is a lovely sentence, and it is good because you are good. I wouldn't have you change it. I love the way he ends this 2 letters. I mean, they have so much disagreement, but he says, in the end, you're a good man. And he is a good man. I'm nearly certain I know who this is. A very good man. Very well-meaning, very kind, very conscientious. You're just vast, very honorable, a vast, very devoted, a vast, vast list of good qualities. And if this is how, as a good man with good qualities, you choose to live your life, then it's a good way to be, because you are a good person. It's just such a beautiful way to bring the thing to a close, and also to point out that from God's point of view, we can just play all these intellectual games we want, and you write this way and I that way and all of this, but God reads the heart. And so if this is the way you express your good heart, then it's a good way to express. It's a very, very sweet way to sort of reconcile all kinds of intellectual and even religious differences. But you have a good heart, and if this is the way this is the way you come to having a good heart, then it's a good way of being. You know, it's just so lovely. Swami was so good at this, because he really wasn't about to take the man's advice. He wasn't about to take seriously what the man wanted him to do, but it wasn't personal. It didn't have anything to do with their ability to be friends. They just weren't going to write the same books in the same way. Okay, moving on then. This is the last letter, I think, in this section. Let me see. But it's longish, so I don't know if we'll finish it tonight or not. It's Reflections on Writing Poetry. And it's written in January of 2007, so this is quite at the end. I don't know what prompted this letter, because there's no reference to poetry written by the person who wrote it. It just is a conversation about poetry. I studied writing poetry for a semester under the English poet W.H. Auden. Auden is a very well-known poet in America, maybe in the world. Oh, he's English, in the English-speaking world. Swamiji was a very promising poet and writer when he was in college, and so this was when he was in college, and he was highly praised by all of his teachers, and I believe including Auden. I particularly remember 2 lines from a poem of his entitled Letter to a Wound. No cloud-like hand can hold him, restraint by women. It always bothered me a little to read that second line, which merely explains the line before it. Poetry, it seems to me, ought not to offer such literal footnotes to its own images. To do so suggests muddy thinking to my mind, which is to say lack of clear inspiration. Far better, I should think, would it have been rather to write something like, "No cloud-like hand can hold him with feminine entreaty." So in both cases, we're talking about the strength of a man that is sometimes undermined by the entreaties of a woman who has a different way of participating in the world, and Swami just didn't think it was clear. Often the poet himself or herself doesn't really have as clear an idea, and Swami never believed in lack of clarity. I forget what Auden actually wrote after that. The poem itself is a cipher. Someone who knew Auden as a friend once told me the poem was meant to be incomprehensible. Auden let only a few of his close friends in on the secret. And that too is something for which I fault him. You see, so now we're talking about, Swami's illustrating for us exactly what he was talking about in the letter before, isn't he? He's just going to the essence here. He's not giving qualifying, saying things, maybe it was a good idea, perhaps he had his reasons. I can understand why he half wanted to communicate and didn't. Swami just says, I forget, so on like that. The poem itself is a cipher. He only let a few people know what it meant, and that too is something for which I fault him. Part of the reason Swami can be so blunt and bold is because he really does love everyone. And because he loves everyone and accepts them as they are, he doesn't have any, he's not really judging, he's commenting. I mean, in person, when he's talking to someone directly, well, sometimes he can be quite blunt then too. But he was very sensitive to what was helpful. But here he is, he doesn't mind just saying it. Now you can imagine the writer of the other letter would be how could Swami just say, I find fault with him, but he has his own right to have his own artistic integrity. I find fault with him for writing an incomprehensible poem on purpose. True poetry, indeed true art of all kinds, ought never to lead one deliberately into impenetrable fogs. It ought to say something not only intelligible, but intelligent. Swami had his point of view. This is, to his mind, the essential purpose of writing. And the essential purpose of writing poetry is to lead a person into something intelligible and intelligent. Why just lead them into confusion? Why bother? The purpose of art is to clarify, to uplift, to make some statement that the artist considers true, and to make it memorably and inspiringly for others. This is a theme Swami touches in many places, which is the purpose of art. In the visual or auditory arts, painting, sculpture, and music, as differentiated from the verbal arts, poetry and prose, the truth doesn't have to be intellectually comprehensible, but it must at least ring true to our feelings, and above all to the dictates of wisdom born of intuition. Indeed, a work of art may express with perfect clarity a negative emotion, such as rage, terror, lust, or despair. But in such a case, we must draw a distinction between fact and truth. Negative emotions, indeed, in the last analysis, all emotions, which generally speaking express agitated feelings of some kind, are delusive because they conceal the truth, they don't reveal it. So here's Swami again doing exactly what he said he was going to do. This is what art is for, this is what we should be doing. If you're going to express these negative emotions, you're expressing a delusion. Art should take us to the truth, not merely in a circle of something that isn't going to serve us in the end. Now, countless artists are going to disagree with Swami, but he has a point of view that you can disagree with, and he can give lots of, and people will. I mean, I'm just tracing this out to see what we'll do. But sir, I really loved that painting. I really loved this picture. I really loved that song, even though, yes, it was all about rage and hate, but it got me in touch with my rage and hate. Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, that's a fact. But Swami's talking in the essence of what the arts can do for us. And he's writing for a future. He's writing for the time when consciousness is altogether lifted and we're all working for self-realization instead of just working for the right to stay in delusion. In the transition between Kali and Dwapara, a lot of people are defending the right to stay in delusion. And that's their right to stay in delusion. But that's not the position Swami's going to take, nor is he going to equivocate about, oh, well, that's just your point of view and I can see it. None of that, which is why the other author the letter writer was offended. Words, on the other hand, overtly communicate ideas. The poet must be a musician in the sound and rhythm of the words he uses. That's lovely. Swami's always talking about rhythm in writing. We talked about it a lot through this whole chapter. In the sound and rhythm of the words he uses. I mean, even just the words themselves, words have sound. Kerfuffle has a particular sound. You know, vice has a different sound. When Swami talks about reading aloud, he always talks about giving the words the vibrations of the meaning. And when one reads the Festival of Light, for example, where we read the same thing every week, part of the way we have to read it is so that the vibration of each word is spoken with the vibration of what that word means, so that it will be picked up on many levels. So the sound and rhythm of the words he uses. He must be a painter in the color of his images. Some language is dull and some is quite vivid in the way it says things. And he must be a sculptor in the way he molds his sentences. So lovely. He must also, however, and above all, in some way, make sense. It's so unfortunate that that has to be said, but it does have to be said. Unless he is deliberately writing nonsense and inviting his reader to join him in the fun. Yes, of course he can insert, out of sheer exuberance, a few nonsensical words, like Shakespeare's, "Hey, nonny, nonny, no," or Lewis Carroll's, "Beware the frumious bandersnatch." Finally, however, I think you should say something, and Swami repeats himself here, both intelligible and intelligent. Am I wrong? Swami asks. It's a fair question. Am I wrong? And here's Swami again. Like, just look how unequivocal he is. See, this is what he would do all the time. On this particular subject, I never had any trouble with him because I shared his point of view. But on any subject, Swami would just go in and declare. Now he's talking about writing. He's talking about art and negative emotions. He's talking about clarity of speech, intelligible and intelligent. And people might want to argue that I'm just making sounds. And yes, but Swami's not going to accept that point of view. He's going to take another. Am I wrong? He does ask the question. Shakespeare, now that I think of it, and this, I love this. See, Swami's reasoning this out. Shakespeare, now that I think about it, wrote some lyrics that were fairly incomprehensible. I'm thinking of Desdemona's song in Othello. The poor soul sat sighing by a sycamore tree, singing willow, willow, willow. Her hand on her bosom, her head on her knee, singing willow, willow, willow. Well, I must admit, the rest of the poem too, which is meant to be sung, has rather incomprehensible lyrics and conveys rather a mood as music does. I myself have written a melody for those lyrics. So I guess maybe words that are meant to be sung can legitimately convey feelings without logical insight, the meaning itself being implicit in the feeling expressed. So I love that about Swami. So first he makes a very strong statement, then here, in this case, he says, but look, here's a good example of something else. He doesn't, however, back off from what he said. He just says, well, here's something, though, that has to be considered. And then he points out that these are lyrics. And so there's melody that's added to them. So so where are we now? I myself, he says, have written a melody. Let me see where I am. Ordinarily, however, I believe that poetry... Oh, I need to give myself a little more light. That's why I'm struggling. There, that will... Ah, yes. Ordinarily, however, I believe that poetry ought to say at least something, both clearly and well, and ought to say it in such a way as to convey at least a hint of that meaning to the reader or the listener. Auden, after those lines, might have gone on to say something like, so here's Swami rewriting Auden's poem. Stride on, O mighty hero, face the light, gain fearlessly into those spear-thrusting rays, beyond which lie golden opportunities, self-conquest and victory. Well, who knows whether he might have considered those lines corny. Now see there, Swami's also talking, because here Swami's talking about a noble ideal, moving out of the delusion of rage and terror and lust and into the power of who we really might be. Well, Auden himself might have considered those lines corny. So Swami's giving, in a sense, the alternate argument why that particular poet chose to write an incomprehensible poem. He doesn't want to write one that's so clear. I've shared with you, but I'll repeat it again. For a period of time, an international, I think it was called rock and roll still at that time. I don't know what it was, what the actual genre would have been. This was in the 70s. They were the #1 band in the world. And they performed at this, in stadiums for thousands of people. And they performed in English, and they were recognized globally. And the lead singer became very devoted for a time to our teaching, well, still devoted to our teachings, but also participated in Ananda for a long time. He was the main songwriter. And his lyrics were a little hard to understand. His poetry was not always intelligible. His voice also was a little shrill, high-pitched, what would you say? Anyway, it was a little pinched. And so Swami wanted to help him. And he wanted to help him, and he thought he could edit some of his songs so that they would be a little more intelligible. He thought he could teach him how to place his voice properly so his voice would be fuller. The man was completely aware of what he was doing, and he said to Swami, first he said, "That's just extraordinarily kind of you, Swamiji. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're taking such an interest in what I'm doing. But if I allowed you to do either of those things, if the lyrics of my song became readily intelligible, and if my voice became less of what it is," he said, "I would immediately lose all my fans." So he declined the kind offer. Swami was very amused because the man knew exactly what world culture wanted at that time. And it did not want the clarity that Swami wanted to give it. It wanted to just sort of vaguely get a feeling. He was a very deep and wonderful man. And his lyrics were always upward moving. But they were just a little unintelligible. You weren't 100% sure what he was talking about. So you could, this is as I recall, I don't want to be unfair to him. And I certainly was never a connoisseur of his music. But it left a little space for you to make it up for yourself, because world culture did not want the kind of clarity that Swami Kriyananda wanted to bring. But still, Swami knows that this is where, if self-realization is the goal, this is where we're going. So you see that everything comes back to self-realization. If self-realization is your goal, then these are your values. One of the things that Swamiji provided for us, and I do my best to try to provide for others, but I can't do it with the magnetism that he did, and it's among the reasons why I wrote this book. So many of our ideas, just like the author of the letter previous to this one, the 2 letters previous to this one, they're habitual. And they've always seemed like a good idea to us. And now we've become devotees of the path of self-realization. And it takes great intention and attention to be able to realize where our cherished habits are contradicted by the path of self-realization. And to see what we have to bring in line in order to really be on this path. And Swami was just so helpful in the way he continuously pointed out the contradiction between our commitment to self-realization and our sentimental attachment to the way we've always thought about things. I mean, sometimes it's sentiment, sometimes it's more real than that, but often it's really just sentiment. This is just what I've always thought, and why can't I just keep thinking it? Well, because it's actually contradicted by the principles of self-realization. And Swamiji just did not, he would not leave us in sloppy thinking. That would be the way I would put it. And it's just very important to don't just say this is what I've always thought, this is what everyone thinks, this is self-evidently good. Ask ourselves really deeply, how does this relate to the values I'm learning or am now espousing? And lots of things have to be re-examined and recreated again and again and again and again. That's the fun of it. That's why it's so vivid. That's speaking for myself, 50 years. And every day is new. Every day I realize something else. I mean, some days are more vivid than others, but regularly, I should say. I just realized that I never really quite comprehended that thought, and I was still holding back from the clarity of thought that Swami's demanding of us. So, there you have it. So, well, who knows whether he might have considered these lines corny. Writers are notoriously fixed on their own way of self-expression. Of course, this section is all about writers. And just in the previous letter, that's exactly what they were saying. This is how you would write it, this is how I write it. I've given all these examples about someone would write it differently, but it changes the vibration. Writers are notoriously fixed on their way of self-expression. Of course they are. That's why they're writing. They're writing because they want to say who they are. It's very interesting. Swamiji, he would never try to make you into someone that you weren't, but he would keep trying to push you until you became yourself. When I finally had this book done, and by the time I actually wrote this one, Swami Kriyananda, as we've known him, it had a lot of integrity and it wasn't mental. This was the first book I published, and it was a breakthrough. I really did it. I did what I set out to do, and I did it as well as I could, and I mastered a whole lot of things that took me years to get it done, but I did it. It took me years to get to the point where I could write it. And when I went to India, Swami asked me to come to India. I finished it there. And he sat with me and we went over every word of the manuscript together. And the way I experienced it was, he was ridiculously respectful of me as the author. And he had never hesitated to throw my writing away and completely redo it. I mean, I was prepared for him to just rewrite every page, because it had happened to me so many times. I mean, this was my first book, but, in a pamphlet or an article or something, and he would even actually said at times, well, it was very helpful that you wrote it first, Asha, because it told me what I didn't want to say. I could laugh at the time, but it was also very hard. But this book, it was mine. I did it. And he respected me for that. He respected it. And as I said, he was ridiculously respectful. I was a joke almost, because I had a reason for everything I did. It wasn't fuzzy thinking. I mean, really, he hardly corrected a word in it. And I mean, I didn't know what he would do. Let me say that first. I had no idea what was going to happen when he read it. I really didn't know. But I understood why he didn't change it, because it was the absolute best I could do, and it was really what I had to say. And prior to that, I didn't know what I had to say, and even if I thought I knew, I didn't know how to say it, because it's an art and a science, and I'd finally learned it. And when I actually said, I knew what I wanted to say, and I said it, why would he interfere with that? So anyway, it's all fascinating. The point is to express oneself strongly, colorfully, and withal to get one's point across clearly. First, making sure that one actually has a point to make. So that's just what I was saying about that book. Whether it be to express inspiration, faith, cynical doubt, or courage. Whatever it is you're trying to say, make sure you can say it. That's Swami admired Michael Jackson at the height of his power before everything in his life collapsed, because Swami said he knows exactly what he wants to say, and he says it perfectly. Swami said, I don't like it. I don't like his message. I don't like his music. He said, but I admire him as an artist. He knows exactly what he wants to say, and he says it perfectly. That's what Swami's saying to us. The next point, of course, is to express thoughts that are valid and true. So, the Baudelaires of this world may successfully infect their hearers with their own mental gloom, but the lines of poetry that get quoted during man's hours of need are those which speak the truth memorably. Those which speak the truth memorably. That would be, in the best possible words, what Swami would say is the purpose of all art, is to speak the truth memorably. So, that's the end of our section on writing, and that's the end of our evening program for tonight. God bless you. Thank you for spending this time with me.